Good evening. My name is Kelly Fulmer, and I'm going to be presenting on Lev Vygotsky's theory of social interaction. Lev Vygotsky was born in the town of Orsha in the Russian Empire. In 1913, he was admitted to the Moscow State University, where he studied law. There's virtually no information about his life during the years of the German occupation and the Civil War until the Bolsheviks captured the town in 1919. Subsequently, Vygotsky was an active participant of major social transformation under the Bolshevik rule and a fairly prominent representative of the Bolshevik government from 1919 until 1923. In 1924, Vygotsky took part in the Second All-Russian Psychoneurological Congress in Leningrad. Soon thereafter, Vygotsky received an invitation to become a research fellow at the Psychological Institute in Moscow. By the end of 1925, Vygotsky completed his dissertation on the psychology of art, which was later published in 1960, and a book, Pedagogical Psychology. In the early 1930s, Vygotsky experienced a deep crisis, both personal and theoretical, and after a period of massive self-criticism, made an attempt at a radical revision of his theory. Vygotsky drew from representatives of the Gestalt psychology and other holistic scholars. They were instrumental in this theoretical shift. Between 1932 and 1934, Vygotsky was aiming at establishing a psychological theory of consciousness, but this theory, because of his death, remained very sketchy and unfinished in form. Vygotsky died of tuberculosis on June 11, 1934, at the age of 37 in Moscow, Russia. Some key points in Vygotsky's work are that social interaction plays a fundamental role in the process of cognitive development. Vygotsky felt that social learning preceded development. He states every function in the child's cultural development appears twice, first on the social level and later on the individual level. First between people, which he termed interpsychological, and then inside the child, which he termed intra-psychological. Another key point in Vygotsky's work is termed the more knowledgeable other. The acronym is MKO, which refers to anyone who has a better understanding or a higher ability level than the learner with respect to a particular task, process, or concept. Normally thought of, this MKO, more knowledgeable other, is normally thought of as being a teacher, a coach, or an adult, but it could also be peers, a younger person, or even a computer or document of some kind. Another key point in Vygotsky's work is called the zone of proximal development. It's also got an acronym ZPD. It refers to the distance between a student's ability to perform a task under adult guidance and or with peer collaboration and the student's ability solving the problem independently. Vygotsky thought that learning occurred in this zone of proximal development. Vygotsky also had stages of development. He listed the primitive stage would be the first stage of his language development theory. It's characterized by an infant experimenting with sound production, making goo-goo, gaga noises. The noises they emit have no purpose but to explore their sense of sound. And the lack of speech during this phase means that no verbal thought is taking place. This does not mean that the baby has a lack of thought, but rather a lack of relationship with her thoughts, his or her thoughts. The second stage in Vygotsky's stages of development is called the naive stage. This begins when babies learn to speak. So when babies learn words without grasping their purpose and meaning, when an infant utters dog, it could mean where is my dog, I want my dog, etc. Over time, the child uses slightly more complex phrases such as doggy now. These phrases lack an understanding of grammar and structure, but the infant does determine meaning from the responses others give to the phrases. The next stage, the third stage in Vygotsky's stages of development, is the external stage. This is when the child starts using objects to signify meaning and words in the external stage. Toys and fingers are examples of what she or he might use to express themselves. Rhyming is also a device used in this phase to help solidify memory of objects and sounds. Vygotsky calls egocentric speech is typical of this stage. This kind of speech occurs when a child talks to him or herself while alone and when interacting with others. Vygotsky calls this the start of a child's verbalization of thought. The fourth and final stage of Vygotsky's stages of development is called the ingrowth stage. This occurs when children start to internalize many of the tasks they learned during the previous phases. For example, he or she may count in his or her head as opposed to using fingers to enumerate. They have a need to communicate with others around them, which improves his or her ability to internalize thoughts and actions. Inner speech also shortens during this phase, called predication. Thought sentences will lack a subject because that subject is already known to the child. Vygotsky placed a high importance on language and believed that language develops from social interactions for communication purposes. Vygotsky viewed language as man's greatest tool and a means for communicating with the outside world. According to Vygotsky, language plays two critical roles in cognitive development. The first is that it is the main means by which adults transmit information to children, and the second being that language itself becomes a powerful tool of intellectual adaptation. Vygotsky studied child development and significant roles of cultural mediation and interpersonal communication. Vygotsky observed how higher mental functions developed through these interactions also represented the shared knowledge of a culture. This process is known as internalization. This is another one of Vygotsky's key points. Internalization can be understood in one respect as knowing how. So, for example, riding a bike or pouring a cup of milk are tools of the society and are initially outside and beyond the child. The mastery of these skills occurs through the activity of the child within this society. A further aspect of internalization is appropriation, in which the child takes a tool and makes it his own, perhaps using it in a way unique to himself. Internalizing the use of a pencil allows the child to use it very much for his own ends rather than drawing exactly what others in society have drawn previously. Perhaps Vygotsky's most important contribution concerns the interrelationship of language development and thought. Vygotsky believed inner speech developed from external speech via a gradual process of internalization, with younger children only really needing to be able to think out loud. Vygotsky believed that in its mature form, inner speech would be unintelligible to anyone except the thinker and would not resemble spoken language as we know it. In particular, it would be greatly compressed. Hence, thought itself develops socially. So according to Vygotsky, language starts as a tool external to the child used for social interaction. Would you agree with this? Do you think that your internal thoughts are the same as your spoken language? The next major point of Vygotsky that I'd like to cover is the zone of proximal development. In this case, proximal means what comes next. The idea is that a child is only able to take the next step in their cognitive development if another person, typically an adult, supports and prompts them to do so. This zone of proximal development refers to the way in which the acquisition of new knowledge is dependent on previous learning, as well as the availability of instruction. The lower limit of ZPD, or the zone of proximal development, is the level of skill reached by the child working independently, so a child working alone by themselves. The upper limit is the level of potential skill that the child is able to reach with the assistance of a more capable instructor. The ZPD provides a prospective view of cognitive development as opposed to a retrospective view that characterizes development in terms of a child's independent capabilities.
Lev Vygotsky was a Russian developmental psychologist whose major contributions to the field and education occurred between the early 1920s and mid to late 1930s. While Vygotsky was only able to provide roughly a decade of work, his contributions are ever present in today's classrooms. As a developmental psychologist, Vygotsky focused a great deal on not only the development of children, but the learning processes involved with their development. According to Vygotsky, learning happens because we interact with the environment. Further, he believed that we do not learn because we have developed, rather, we develop because we have learned. In short, learning precedes development. Learning new things enhances our developmental level. However, in order to learn, we must be presented with tasks that are just out of reach of our present abilities. Tasks that are too simple or already within our present abilities do not promote learning. On the other hand, tasks that are too complex become frustrating and no learning occurs. Vygotsky believed that those tasks which are just beyond our present ability exist in what he called the zone of proximal development. The tasks in the zone of proximal development are the things we can almost do ourselves, but need help from others to accomplish. After receiving help from others, we will eventually be able to do them on our own, thus shifting them out of our zone of proximal development. In other words, we have learned something. Here is an example. Little Johnny cannot swim. If he tried to teach himself to swim, he would most likely drown. However, if Johnny enlists the help of a swimming instructor, he will soon be able to learn to swim. In this scenario, swimming would be considered to be within Johnny's zone of proximal development. Why? Because it is a task he cannot accomplish on his own, but he can accomplish with the encouragement and guidance from someone else. Okay, so how does the concept of the zone of proximal development factor into the roles of today's teachers? Simple. The subject matter that teachers are going to teach our students falls within their zone of proximal development. Our students are able to learn the content. They just need guidance and encouragement from a teacher in order to do so. As teachers, we must be conscious of the fact that every student has a different zone of proximal development. In modern educational jargon, this means differentiation. Educators must design lesson plans that cater to the zone of proximal development for each of their students in order to avoid boredom and/or frustration in the classroom. The take-home message? Every student learns differently. But, more importantly, every student can learn. They just need the help of a teacher.
Vygotsky's zone of proximal development is often compared to Piaget's discovery learning theory. In 1990, Freund conducted a study in which children had to decide which items of furniture would be placed in particular areas of a dollhouse. Some children were allowed to play with their mother in a similar situation before they attempted it alone, which is considered the zone of proximal development, whilst others were allowed to work on this by themselves, Piaget's discovery learning. When Freund looked at these in comparison, he showed the greatest improvement with the students who worked with their mother in the zone of proximal development compared to those who it was their first attempt at the task, or Piaget's discovery learning. The conclusion was that guided learning within the zone of proximal development led to greater understanding and performance than working alone did. After Vygotsky's passing, the zone of proximal development was further developed by Wood, Bruner, and Ross in 1996. They introduced the concept of scaffolding, which refers to the context provided by knowledgeable people, such as adults, to help children to develop their cognitive skills. An important aspect of scaffolding is that there is a gradual withdrawal of support as the child's knowledge and confidence increase.
Scaffolding is the support needed to assist the student in achieving their learning goals. Scaffolding is a set of tools the educator has available when the student encounters difficulty. Scaffolding tools fall into 4 basic categories: metacognitive, procedural, strategic, and conceptual. Metacognitive scaffolds direct the learner to review and assess what they already know. Procedural scaffolds direct the learner with tools like flowcharts, sitemaps, even complex graphical representations. Strategic scaffolds provide the learner alternative ways to approach a given task. Conceptual scaffolds direct the trainer in deciding what to consider. Mental processing utilization is diminished when the student cannot see a way out of the problem. The scaffold can be used to illuminate the path for the student.
As you can see, much of Vygotsky's theory of social interaction is relevant to teaching. In particular, a contemporary educational application of Vygotsky's theories is reciprocal teaching, which is used to improve students' ability to learn from text. In this method, teacher and students collaborate in learning and practicing 4 key skills: summarizing, questioning, clarifying, and predicting. The teacher's role in this process is reduced over time, which exemplifies scaffolding. Also, Vygotsky is relevant in instructional concepts such as scaffolding, in which a teacher or more advanced peer helps to structure or arrange a task so that a novice can work on it successfully. Vygotsky's theories feed into current interest in collaborative learning, suggesting that group members should have different levels of ability so more advanced peers can help less advanced members within their zone of proximal development.